Next order of business.
Ordered that the city clerk place the following non-binding ballot question on the ballot to be used at Ward 3 in the Ward 3 2015 municipal election. Do you support city acquisition of a portion of the land at the location of the former Malden Hospital to create open green space and a historic park dedicated to the hospital's place in Malden's history, including the groups and individuals who share that history? Councilor Matheson.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I added this to the ballot for a couple of reasons. Not only are we considering some ballot questions this municipal cycle, which I'm all in favor of hearing from the people as long as it's comprehensible on a ballot and it's of public interest, and that leads me to the next reason why I put this on. I've been hearing more and more all around the ward that people are not only in opposition of proposed high-density apartment development, 400 units, which would comprise basically the buildable portion of that former Malden Hospital site, an estimated perhaps 8 acres of space, which is very high density for a Residence A zoning, single-family home community, one of the nicest in the city. I held several ward meetings on that, and in fact, in conjunction with those ward meetings, we actually sent out abutters notices to a double-wide abutters circle. Those notices went out on 3 different occasions. On 2 of those meetings, we filled the BB auditorium and allowed the proposed developer to, make his pitch and speak with the folks and give us his last and best offer. And I'm hearing back resoundingly that that is not what the community wants. I think that kind of density will congest that community permanently. And at the same time, I'm hearing from a group of concerned residents, as well as residents all around the ward, that they'd like to see some amount of green space and park space be incorporated into that area. It might be the only time in our lives that we'll have 18 acres with which to secure some land for the public benefit. I've got a petition with hundreds of signatures that say they want something to that effect, and I know we heard from the group earlier in the year that had nearly 1,000 signatures opposing that high-density development. Many of us were at the planning board hearing last week that went late into the night, where Granada Highlands, a community that is not a single-family community, it's designed to be an apartment community with almost 1,000 apartments, wanted to add a couple hundred more, and the majority of the council came out and opposed it. And after the majority of the council opposed it, and all these members of the community opposed it, and no one spoke in favor of it, the mayor's representative was there, and she read a letter from the mayor that actually opposed that. The mayor has said in this instance that he thinks yet another 4th meeting. I don't know if abutters notices be required, but we've spent thousands of dollars to entertain this proposal by this developer that the community doesn't want. And I'm all for meetings. I have them all the time. The residents of Ivy Road had an issue they were concerned about. We had a community meeting. Fellsway East, there were some homes being proposed. We had a community meeting on that. Wiley Street. I've had meetings on all sorts of issues. But we have 3 community meetings, and the house is full, and the people speak clearly, and then you go around the ward. I mean, this is an election year. I'm talking to a lot of folks. And you hear from them the same thing over and over. We don't want that high-density development. I think 1,000 people and 500 cars are going to create traffic snarls. It's going to be a nightmare, and you can't unring the bell. Once we add that kind of density, there's no going back. We've got to get this right the first time. So I'm all for hearing from the people. I think this is the vehicle to do it. Let's put it on the Ward 3 ballot. I think it's a pretty plainly stated question. Do you support a portion of land to be acquired at the Malden Hospital site for the purpose of open green space? And I think that a historic park is a great way to kind of honor the history of the site. Malden Hospital had one of the top birthing centers north of Boston. We had a couple councilors born there. I know Junior Aid was founded through that institution. And of course, there's a lot of relationship there to the Chandler family and Converse, our first mayor, and Frederick Olmsted. And so let's hear from the folks. I think putting in the ballot is a great way to reach a lot of people. I think it's a very fair way to get a grip on where people stand and what the future of that site should hold for us. This council unanimously voted earlier in the year to support acquisition of some of that land for the public benefit. And before we move any further, let's let the people speak. With that, I think I've said enough. Anyone else wish to speak or address the public here? Councilor Kinnon, of course. You have the floor, sir.
Yes, and thank you, Mr. President, and I fully support you in this effort on saving that piece of property. We have built and overbuilt, and I was just wondering if you might not have that question asked to the entire community, because I think there is a group out there, they're trying to build support. It's almost like free advertising if the question goes out there. Support for buying High Rock didn't come overnight. A lot of delaying tactics went into it, but overall, I think the vast majority of people would say that was the right thing to do today. So I'd like to help you build support. I think you could certainly get a lot of support out of Ward 6, and would help you do that. So if you'd consider it, I'd like it to go over the whole city. Thank you.
I would welcome that wholeheartedly, Councilor Kinnon, and thank you for those sentiments. Well spoken, as always. Councilor D'Angelo.
Yes, I too think this is a citywide issue and would second the motion to amend to put it citywide. And the other thing, though, too, is I really think that this will go a long way towards getting Hallmark back to the table, because I think this will pass, and I think that we need to have them in a good conversation to be able to have a good outcome here. Because we can pass resolutions here or ordinances here, we can pass questions on the ballot here, but at the end of the day, it's their property, and you know, they realize we have leverage over zoning, but you know, they're the property owners. So it takes two parties to be able to make a deal. And so I'm hopeful that this is part of the way of getting them to make a deal, getting them to the table and getting them to make a deal. And I'm all for letting the people's voices be heard. Thank you.
And we did have Hallmark at the table, and I'll tell you a little bit about that meeting in just a moment. I want to give Councilor Anderson his opportunity to take the floor. Councilor?
Thank you, Mr. President. I support the idea of a citywide issue in putting this on the ballot citywide. I think for those of us who were at the planning board meeting the other night when last Wednesday, I guess it was, when there was the plan that the Granada Highlands had for putting in a lot of additional, 236 additional units up there. I think the people came out and spoke loudly and clearly, as well as the councilors spoke loudly and clearly about the size of the increase of individual units that were up there, and I see this as falling in the same line, that we need to slow down the growth and not build on every piece of land that we have. And so I, not just two, I, would support this going on the ballot citywide, and I'd like to see it passed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Anderson. Councilor Altrino?
Mr. President, you know, I think it's a great idea to make sure it's citywide, because if this does happen at some point, it's the city budget that has to pay for it. Mm-hmm. So if we're, you know, as we mentioned earlier, in the state, if the state needs to wants to fund this additional $50–60 million for children to go to school, the city will have the same questions to ask its council. I won't be on there any longer after January, but we also have to say, where do we get that money to acquire? I think it's a gem up there. I would love a project like this, and I'm sure it will come back. The meetings were very well attended. I went to them, and I think the people do want something like this from what I heard at these meetings. But it should be a citywide, because it would be something that have to be financed by the entire city at some point, and all the taxpayers in the city of Malden at some point. So I think you'll get a good vote on this, and I applaud your efforts. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilor Altrino. Councilor Spatafora?
Thank you, Mr. President. I think everybody said the same thing. It is a citywide endeavor, simply because I think the cost alone is something that would need the entire council's vote. I do like the wording. It says a portion of it, because I, as one who has attended these meetings and live, you know, literally within a 2-minute walk to buy a piece of property that big and to make it into any size green space or park. I think every council here has probably put a baseball diamond in a soccer field and maybe some turf and realized it's millions and millions of dollars to do so. And I think this at least sets a stage where it gives the city the ability to vote for something. And I think then we have the ability to take a portion, because I don't think realistically it could be the entire thing, because of the cost. But this at least would give us the city's approval, meaning their stamp of the approval, the residents of the community, the approval, disapproval, or something like this. And then I think as the governing body, if we all here in the next election cycle, it gives us the ability to look at this and then realistically put a price tag on a portion of this, a smaller space, a larger space, and the cost. Because I think the easy part is to say, yes, it's a great idea, let's move forward, everybody's gonna vote. But I think when it comes down to somebody saying, I'm willing to pay $500 more in my taxes to do this, could be a differentiator. But the first step is definitely this process. So I respect the process. You have to put it on the ballot. There's a couple of the questions there, so hopefully this allows the community to come out and vote. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilor Spatafora. Is there a second request? Oh, Councilor DeMaria, you have the floor.
Thank you,
First
Mr.
time.
President. I do support this. I would caution that, and I also support it citywide, so that gives us a little bit of time to work the language out for this. The only caution that I have is once we put it on the ballot, it poses the question, where's the city going to get the money? What is the portion of the land that we're proposing? So I think as we work on the language for this, for the citywide election, we might want to fine tune it a little bit so that our residents will be clear what they're voting for. But I also do support the citywide. Does that make sense?
I understand what you're saying.
Yep.
But we need to make a determination and put it on the ballot now. So if you had something more specific, feel free to volunteer it. Otherwise, I'm going to go to Councilor Crowe.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Councilor Crowe, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think we're all sort of in agreement that, really does need to go citywide on the ballot. And, I think you will get a good turnout, and I think people across the city will be in favor of this. I do caution that we got to figure out, I don't want it to be laid out there that everyone votes for this and then we are then going to acquire whatever piece of land that we don't, because we don't have that money, and how is that going to happen? I don't want to have the same thing as we've had in other votes and people think they voted, and 80% voted, and, well, I'm not sure it keeps to the same standard. And since we don't have how much money this acquisition is going to cost, the cleanup or all the other things, we're just agreeing that, we'd like this to have a park. How we get there is a long road, so it doesn't happen. So I think that we need still more of those community meetings to make sure that we are incrementally going down.
Thank you, Councilor Crowe. Before I add some remarks from the chair, something more from Councilor Anderson?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I think we're all on the same page, everyone who has spoken, about the idea of it being citywide. But I think that we're delving too much into the weeds on this if we're trying to define how much money we spend and what portion of the land that we would try to acquire. I think those are the things that we would work on through the process. I think what this order would do for us is put the conceptual question on the ballot, and that's what we're looking for. We're looking for the conceptual question to be answered about whether or not the residents of the city of Malden want us to buy some of that land. How much of that land, what costs, what the impact, that's what we've got to figure out, assuming that we get a positive vote on this. So, councilors, I wouldn't be too concerned at this point about trying to define all of that. We'll define that once we go through the process, once we see how much it's going to cost, how much we can afford, and therefore I would, as Councilor D'Angelo was saying in my left ear, let's move the question. Huh?
Thank you, Councilor Anderson. I'll just add a couple quick and very, very well spoken. And I've always welcomed this as a citywide issue, a citywide concern, and everyone's participation is very welcome. Obviously, it's more of a concern to the community surrounding the site, but I think for all the reasons that were stated, this would make an excellent citywide ballot question. I will say that Hallmark has a new CEO, Alan McDonald, and I met with him and the mayor and State Senator Lewis and some others, and it was a very productive meeting. One thing I can say about that meeting is Mr. McDonald has said it's not purely about finance anymore. It's also about Hallmark's legacy and reputation in the community. And they're not in the business of land banking, and they would like to see something happen with this site. And they welcome the city's position at the table. And with that being said, at the end of this meeting, it seemed to me like there was an affordable path forward, but again, back to what Councilor Anderson said, conceptually, we need to know that the people are behind this, and this is how we do it. So with that, we will, is there a motion?
There is a
Well, motion to amend first by Councilor Kinnan.
Kinnan made a motion, seconded by Councilor D'Angelo. Essentially, the motion was to delete the words Ward 3.
Citywide.
So it would say, ballot to be used at the 2015 municipal election.
Yeah, that's perfectly stated. That encapsulates the motion. So on Councilor Kinnan's motion to amend by deleting the words Ward 3, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? That amendment carries. On Councilor Murphy's motion to approve this order as amended, seconded by Councilor, I'm going to give this one to D'Angelo. I saw his hand come up. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? I heard none. That carries unanimously. Congratulations. We'll move on to the next order of business.